At my son's funeral, the woman who abandoned him returned to claim 24 million euros, but she didn't know. I sat in the front pew of the church, staring at my son Arthur's oak coffin. Every cell in my body screamed in agony, but on the outside, I did not shed a single tear. I could not. Just then, the great doors of the church swung open. A woman entered, and the entire congregation fell silent. It was Veronica, the ex-wife who had abandoned my son 15 years ago to chase a life of luxury in Monaco. 15 years. Not a single letter, not a single call. I thought we would never have to see her face again. But now, here she was, at the funeral of the very man she had deserted. She wore a black Versace dress and large sunglasses. She had not come to mourn. She had come to perform. Amélie, my niece, leaned close to my ear, her voice trembling. Auntie, she is live streaming. I glanced at Amélie's phone. It was true. Veronica was broadcasting the funeral live, complete with a link to a GoFundMe page. A cold fury rose within me, eclipsing even my grief. My son was lying in that coffin, and the woman who had shattered his heart dared to turn his funeral into a fundraising spectacle. Upon being discovered, Veronica was unfazed. She put her phone away and strode to the front. As the wife, the undivorced widow of Arthur, I hereby declare my legal right to his inheritance. A murmur went through the church, but Jean-Pierre, my lawyer, was prepared. He stepped forward. Miss Romano, here is the divorce decree, ratified by the courts of Monaco 14 years ago. You have no legal standing here. Veronica's face hardened. Everyone thought the drama was over. But as she walked past me to leave, Veronica leaned down and whispered in my ear, "Do you really think you have won, Madame Dubois? This opera has only just begun." She smiled, a sharp, cold smile, then turned and walked away. The pain of losing my son and the rage of this humiliation merged into one. I knew the battle to protect Arthur's memory, and his legacy had only just started. Veronica's opera began the very next morning. My butler placed the morning paper on the breakfast table with an apologetic look. I did not need to ask why. Splashed across the front page of Le Gossip, France's most notorious tabloid, was a paparazzi photo of me. It had captured the single moment of weakness I'd allowed myself at the funeral, when I had buried my head on Jean-Pierre's shoulder. Beneath the photo, a sensational headline was printed in enormous letters. Madame Dubois's crocodile tears, mourning her son or his 24 million euros. The article inside was filled with venomous insinuations, quoting close sources who claimed Arthur and I had a strained relationship, that I only cared about the massive fortune he had left behind. The storm had begun. The high society of Bordeaux, always judgmental and ruthless, began to whisper. The condolence calls dwindled, replaced by silence. The party invitations I usually received stopped coming. I was being isolated. But Veronica did not stop there. A few days later, she released a short, low-quality video online. The footage was blurry, showing Arthur, gaunt and lying in a hospital bed. His voice was weak, broken, speaking in English, the language they had once shared. Mother forced me to sign. The clip was only a few seconds long, but it created a firestorm. The hashtag number Justice for Arthur quickly trended on French Twitter. Public opinion turned against me. I was painted as a cruel mother who had taken advantage of her dying son to force him to sign papers. I watched that video dozens of times. At first, searching for an inconsistency, for proof it was fake. But then, my eyes fixated on a small detail. Glimpsed behind Arthur was the shadow of a nurse. And around that nurse's neck was a very distinctive silver cross necklace. My heart stopped. It was Amélie's necklace. My niece, whom I had trusted completely, who had stood by my side in the church. While I was still reeling from that betrayal, Veronica launched her final attack, a blow aimed directly at my memories. She posted another video. This time she sat by a fireplace, her makeup soft, her eyes glistening with tears. In her hands she held a musical score. "This was the last sonata Arthur wrote for me," she said, her voice catching. "A piece about our love and our regrets. But his mother, in her bitterness, tried to steal it from me." She looked directly into the camera. "I would rather destroy it than let this sacred memory fall into the hands of a wicked woman." With that, she tossed the score into the flames. I sat there, watching the notes my son had written for me on my last birthday burn to ash on my phone screen. Veronica's opera was at its crescendo, and I, the main villain in her production, was being burned alive by the fires of media and lies. Having successfully stirred public opinion, Veronica made her official legal move. She filed a lawsuit against me in the Bordeaux courthouse. The charge: manipulation of a vulnerable person, forcing Arthur to change his will in his final days when he was no longer lucid. On the day of the first hearing, I felt like a criminal. Camera flashes blinded me as I entered the Palace of Justice. Inside, Veronica sat at the plaintiff's table, her expression one of pained but determined resolve, the perfect image of a wife seeking justice for her late husband. Her lawyer, a slick shark from Paris, began with a legal twist that not even Jean-Pierre had anticipated. He produced an old handwritten will, written on a yellowed piece of paper. "Your Honor," he declared, "this is the holographic will, testament holography, of Mr. Arthur Dubois, written 16 years ago, shortly after his marriage. It clearly bequeaths his entire estate to his beloved wife, Veronica Romano." The will bore Arthur's signature and those of 2 witnesses. Under French law, such a handwritten will is legally valid, unless a subsequent will is proven to be more legitimate. And that was precisely what they were trying to negate. Next, they called a private doctor from Geneva to the stand. This doctor, whom I had never met, presented a fabricated, cleverly prepared medical file. He testified that, at my request, he had increased Arthur's morphine dosage in his final days, a dose that was medically unnecessary. This, the doctor concluded coldly, would have rendered the patient delirious and extremely susceptible to influence. A gasp went through the courtroom. It was all perfectly orchestrated. The video of Arthur saying "Mother forced me to sign," the old will, and the doctor's testimony. They were painting an irrefutable picture. I had taken advantage of my son's drug-induced delirium to force him to sign a new will, disinheriting his true wife. I sat there, completely on the defensive. The evidence against me was overwhelming. I looked around the courtroom and saw only eyes filled with suspicion and judgment. Even Jean-Pierre looked worried. I felt as if the entire world had turned against me. Veronica's opera was reaching its finale, and it seemed I was destined for a tragic end. I returned to my estate in despair. The walls of the courthouse seemed to be closing in, and the image of Veronica's smug face haunted me. That night, I could not sleep. I went into Arthur's study, a room I had been avoiding for months. I needed to find something, anything, to fight the web of false evidence they had woven. I began to go through drawers, stacks of papers, and then, in the corner of a cabinet, I found an old oak box filled with letters Arthur had written and received throughout his life. I sat on the floor and began to read them, one by one, searching hopelessly. Near exhaustion, I reached the bottom of the box. There, a single unenveloped letter was tucked beneath an old photo of the 2 of us. Arthur's handwriting, more shaky and weak than usual. "Dearest mother," the letter began, "I am so tired. She is back. Veronica came to see me. She cried, said she regretted everything, promised to fix it all. I don't know if I have the strength to resist her sweet words." My heart clenched as I read the next lines. "But how can I forgive the betrayal from all those years ago? The photographs you showed me still haunt me. I am afraid I will be weak again, that I will believe her lies. I am afraid she will hurt you again." The letter ended there, as if left unfinished. But it confirmed one thing. Until his very last days, my son still believed Veronica had betrayed him. He still believed the lie I had planted in his heart 15 years ago. And he had been fighting, not just his illness, but his own love. And then I remembered the video. I opened it again on my phone, watching it over and over. My eyes were glued to the shadowy figure of the nurse in the background, and I saw it. A glint of light from the person's necklace. A silver cross necklace. It was Amelie's. The next morning, without calling ahead, I drove straight to Amelie's apartment. She opened the door, and her face went pale when she saw me. I said little, simply stepping inside and looking her directly in the eye. "That is a beautiful necklace, Amelie," I said, my voice like ice. It showed up so clearly in the video Veronica posted. Under my gaze, she crumbled. She sobbed and confessed everything. Veronica had approached her, promising her the life she had always dreamed of. Amelie had received a Birkin bag and a large sum of money in exchange for her help. She had snuck Veronica into the hospital at night. She had used Veronica's phone to film the video while Arthur was delirious with pain. And she was the one who had switched the musical scores, giving Veronica the original that Arthur had written for me, so she could burn it on camera. The betrayal from the niece I had loved was more painful than any of Veronica's slander. As I was driving back, my phone rang. It was a friend of mine who worked at a prestigious auction house in Paris. "Eleanor," his voice was urgent. "I have to tell you. Veronica Romano has been in contact with us. She wants to sell Arthur's Steinway grand piano. She is calling it their final gift of love. That piano, where Arthur had composed his most beautiful music, where his soul resided. Now Veronica was about to auction it off, to trample on his memory and turn it into cash. My rage reached its peak. I had the evidence. I had the confession. It was time to end this opera. Before the final court date, Veronica delivered her masterstroke. She appeared on France's most watched morning talk show. Sitting on a plush sofa, she wept, spinning a perfectly fabricated tragic love story of being torn apart by a powerful mother-in-law and her own belated regret. The entire nation seemed to believe her. On the day of the final hearing, the tension was palpable. Veronica entered the courtroom with the confidence of someone who had already won. Her lawyer announced, "Your Honor, today, we have one final, irrefutable piece of evidence." He projected a clear video onto the large screen, showing a woman with a build identical to mine, standing over the hospital bed, forcing Arthur to sign a document. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. This seemed to be the end for me. But then Jean-Pierre, my lawyer, calmly rose. "Your Honor, we would like to call an expert to analyze this video." He called an analyst from Interpol to the stand. The expert, after a brief examination, gave his unequivocal conclusion. "Your Honor, this video is a deepfake, created using old family videos." The first shock. The confident veneer on Veronica's face began to crack. "Next," Jean-Pierre said, "we would like to call a witness, Miss Amélie Dubois." Amélie took the stand, trembling, unable to look at me. Promised a lenient sentence for her cooperation, she bowed her head and confessed to Veronica's entire scheme, from the live stream at the funeral, to filming the fake video in the hospital, to switching the musical scores. Veronica's expression shifted from confidence to panic. And then Jean-Pierre delivered the final blow. "Your Honor, after my client discovered these truths, she gave me one last clue left by Arthur, the business card of a notary. We contacted him. It turns out that before he passed, Mr. Arthur Dubois secretly visited this notary and left a sealed envelope with instructions that it was to be opened only in the presence of the judge at the final hearing. The notary came forward and presented the envelope. The judge carefully opened it. Inside was a small USB drive. The video on the drive was projected onto the large screen. This time, it was the real image of my son. Arthur, though weak and gaunt, had eyes that were completely clear and lucid. He looked directly into the camera. I, Arthur Dubois, his voice rang out, clear and firm, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare my intention to leave my entire estate and all its assets to my mother, Eleanor Dubois. He paused, taking a breath. 15 years ago, Veronica Romano betrayed me. She has now returned, but I do not want the woman who destroyed my trust to receive a single thing from my legacy. He looked into the lens as if he were looking into my eyes, and in his gaze I saw an absolute trust, a trust built upon a lie. Mother, protect my legacy. The video ended. Silence enveloped the courtroom. Then, a shrill scream pierced the air. Veronica leaped to her feet, her elegance gone, no longer speaking French. She shrieked in Italian, cursing, yelling that it was all a conspiracy, that I had bought everyone off. Her true face, raw and ugly, was exposed to all of France. Her opera had ended, not with applause, but with a humiliating collapse. Justice was served. I won the case. With Arthur's final video and Amélie's confession, Veronica faced a long prison sentence for fraud, slander, and falsifying evidence. Amélie, my niece, received a suspended sentence for her role as an accomplice. The honor of the Dubois family was restored in the eyes of the nation. The party invitations started arriving again, the whispers replaced by praise for my resilience. A few days after the trial, I stood alone before Arthur's white marble tomb, nestled under an ancient oak tree in the small estate cemetery. The autumn wind rustled the faded yellow leaves on the ground. I protected you, Arthur, I whispered to the cold stone. I protected your legacy, but there was no joy of victory in my heart, only a cold emptiness. The cost was too high, my son. I had won the war against Veronica, but I had lost my faith in Amélie. Trust, once broken, can never be truly mended. And I had won, but that victory was built upon a lie that had ruined my son's life, that had pushed him into the arms of loneliness and illness. Months later, life on the estate had returned to its semblance of peace. One rainy afternoon, looking for something to do, I decided to go down to the wine cellar to organize the old vintages. Amidst the dusty oak barrels, tucked away in a wall niche, I found an old, forgotten metal box. It was Arthur's childhood memory box. Curious, I brought it up to the living room. Inside were familiar items: a toy car with a broken wheel, a few marbles, an old notebook, and at the bottom, tied with a faded ribbon, was a stack of old photographs. I pulled one out. They were the very photos I had hired a private investigator to take 15 years ago. Veronica, laughing, standing next to a wealthy, older man in Monaco, a hand held, a chaste kiss on the cheek. It had all started here. The memory of that day came flooding back, as clear as if it were yesterday. I had seen Veronica's true nature long before Arthur had. I saw the greed in her eyes when she looked at our vineyards. I saw the ambition in the way she spoke of the future. I knew she did not love my son. She loved his inheritance. Arthur, my romantic, naive son, was never a match for a woman like her. I remembered sitting across from Arthur in the library, laying those photos on the table. I can still see his face, drained of all color, as he looked at them. She said he was just a business partner. You promised you would trust her, he had shouted, his voice choked with pain. And I had replied coldly, "You are too weak, Arthur. A woman like her will destroy you and this entire family. You must choose, her or me." He had broken, and he had chosen me. I looked at the photograph in my hand. I knew the man had indeed been just a business partner. The photos had been deliberately framed, cropped, and presented to create a narrative of betrayal, a false narrative of which I was the author. A flicker of regret, not a single one. Deep down, I felt not a shred of guilt. On the contrary, I felt a cold resolve. I had done what was necessary. I had saved my son from a mistake, saved the Dubois family from a greedy outsider. His pain, his loneliness in the years that followed, was simply the price to be paid for the security and survival of our lineage, a necessary sacrifice. I took the stack of photos and walked to the crackling fireplace. I looked at them one last time, at the lie that had shaped my family's destiny, and then I tossed them into the flames. I stood there, watching my past burn to ash. I poured myself a glass of the deep red wine from our family estate, and I looked at my reflection in it. A satisfied, almost invisible smile touched my lips. I had won. At all costs.